Should you rent or buy your property when moving to Portugal? Hey again, it's George from Portugal and Beyond. As always, I hope you enjoy my channel. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And today, I want to give you some reasons to rent as well as some reasons to buy property in Portugal. I know they go against one another, but I hope you'll understand many of you have owned property in various countries and prefer to do that. Some of you are renting and that's what you like is your lifestyle. So when you're moving to Portugal, there's a few things to consider with each, but I wanted to go through them because I think it's important. It's a big decision and it's a big commitment, whether you're making, I'll say, the short-term commitment of renting or you're doing a long-term commitment of buying. There's a lot to consider and a lot to go into it. So let's just talk philosophically in this video about some reasons for doing each. So let's start with renting. Let's go through some reasons to rent. So one of the reasons to rent is flexibility. Maybe you are going to get a place in Lisbon or Porto in the Algarve and you decide that's where I want to be. Well, you can maybe stay at the same place, renew, or maybe you want to move around within Portugal to find a place that you will call home, maybe not in year one, but maybe by year 5. So if you want to have the flexibility to do that, renting makes a lot of sense because that way you're not in a mortgage, you're not into something that's not easily able to get out of. So you're able to hop around and be a nomad each year or every 6 months or depending on how long your lease is. So flexibility, I think, is a main part of why many people want to rent. Secondly, and this is for many people that are moving here, the D7. Most people that are coming to Portugal from outside the European Union are coming on what's called a D7 visa. And the requirement of that visa is to have at least a 1-year lease agreed to somewhere in Greater Lisbon as a requirement to fulfill in order to get your D7 visa. So some of this is practical. You don't have to buy a property to go through this and to fulfill the D7, but you do need that 1-year lease. And with that, again, that gives you some flexibility. So if you have to get one and maybe you end up in a place with maybe a landlord that you don't necessarily like, or maybe you move to Lisbon because it's the biggest city, but after a year you decide you want to move someplace else, at least it gets you in, you get your D7, and then from there you can go someplace else, or you can buy later on, of course. Another thing, and this is also more from a practical standpoint, you have more predictable monthly expenses. You're not going to have any curveballs because you know what rent's going to be, what utilities are. In some cases, they roll everything into one rent payment. In some cases, you'll have rent plus all the other utilities, depending on how long your lease is, who you're leasing with, and what you've negotiated. So at least you know what your budget is. So from that standpoint, it's more finite, and that's something that is very important, I think, to people, especially if you're moving and you're retired or you're in a pension age. Budgets, a fixed budget, your finances are super important. So you want to make sure that you don't have the roller coasters of unpredictable expenses. So renting oftentimes will outweigh buying for that reason. And then this sort of leads into another one is when something goes wrong, the roof starts leaking, the hot water heater breaks, there's issues with the apartment or the home, somebody else is taking care of that bill. You're not. The landlord is responsible for making the fixes and repairs. You don't have to. There may be some minor things that you might fix and then try to get reimbursed from the landlord, but ultimately, it's not your property, so it's not your problem. It's someone else's responsibility. So those are main reasons why I think people look to rent versus buy. And over 2.5 years, the majority of the people that we run into that are expats, we're immigrants from other countries, they prefer to rent because at any given point, they may say, we want to go back home or move to another country or move to a different part of Portugal. and they don't want to get wrapped into a mortgage or a long-term commitment. They want to be out of it in, let's say, 3-6 months, or at the worst, a year, to be able to give them freedom and flexibility. So those are the major reasons that we think you may want to rent when coming to Portugal. And that's the feedback that we get from all of our friends, because there's few people that buy, and I'll go into that in a little bit. We're one of them. So I'll switch gears here and talk about some reasons why you may want to own your property in Portugal as opposed to renting. So first and foremost, it's more philosophical. You own something. You're owning and investing in a place, and it's yours. It's not somebody else. You're not paying someone else's rent. You're investing in your own future, in your own present, so to speak. There's a philosophical mindset with that. Some people go along with that. Some people don't. But in our case, we wanted to make sure that we own something, because that way, that leads to the second reason here. We were committed to the long term. So we wanted to be in Portugal. We were not positive that Lisbon, where we're at, is going to be our final destination, but we wanted to be committed to ourselves and getting over here. And part of that reason for being committed was to let go of our place and sell our place in the US. And so where I'm going with that, that's also philosophical or more psychological, is that given the last couple of years of the pandemic, if we had a place back in the US, we would have maybe had 100 reasons to go back. And there were several times where we got to a point where we talked about maybe we just go back. Maybe it's just too difficult with what's going on. We'll go back. It would have been a lot easier had we still had a property back in the US, as opposed to having to sell this, try to sell this during a pandemic, then find a property, going back and forth. It just would have been probably more nightmarish. But I think making a commitment that you're going to be someplace, for us, it's again a philosophical argument, but I think sometimes it's what many of us need to be able to get us out of the it's easy to go back to where we came from mentality. And then with that, you're also committing to maybe the country you're in, the city, your neighborhood. We came to Portugal a few times, so this was not a brand new experience for us, but we wanted to be committed. We really liked the neighborhood, and we felt that, okay, we want to be a part of this. And when we preferred Lisbon at the time, we still do. So we felt like this was the place for us. And I think some of you, hopefully this will resonate, that if you really want to commit, you need to kind of get rid of the stuff, and even stuff in storage, sell it all and move and start fresh. But I will say that doesn't work for everybody. So there's a reason a small percentage own versus a large percentage rent. And then the third one's more practical, to have equity, to have an appreciable asset. And although that's not guaranteed, if you're buying property that's, I'll say, of at least decent quality near the city center or in the city center of Porto, Lisbon, or along the Algarve, there's a huge chance that you're going to make money and you're going to have some equity. As long as you didn't completely overpay for something, if you hold it for 3, 5, 10, 20 years, you're going to make money on the property. It's just the way it works. It doesn't necessarily hold true for some of the rural areas. You may buy property and it's flat, so 5 years later you're selling it for almost the same amount. I think some of that real estate philosophy holds true regardless of what country you're coming from. Big cities are usually often expensive and sometimes way too expensive. But the flip side of that is you can sell your property more quickly than, let's say, in a more rural setting. That's not 100% true, but we've found that to be true in our travels. So having equity, something that will make money, is important to us, and it might be important to you. And if so, that might tip the scale towards buying versus renting. And then, this is something that's also a recent phenomenon, I'll say, especially in the United States, England, some parts of Canada as well. Mortgage is cheaper than rent. I can't say that that's always been the case, but with the way housing costs are, and we're in Lisbon. Porto is starting to do the same thing where the rents are escalating to a point where if you're able to get into a mortgage, it's a much better deal. To some degree, the Algarve, give or take, depending on where you're at. But for example, we're paying 650 euros a month for our flat here in what's called the Lapa Estrella area neighborhood. The same size place just up the street or a few streets over is going to be 1,400 euros for the same thing. So we didn't plan it that way. We knew we were going to buy, and we also put a lot down. So we have a very small mortgage compared to many people. But with that said, 650 to live here is a lot better than 1,300. And if we could not get into this area for, let's say, 1,300 to 1,800 for a property, if we were renting, we might reconsider and not come or not live here in this part of Lisbon. We'd go move someplace else and live someplace else. So that's something that's important to think about in this day and age. Oftentimes, as much as you may not want the commitment of buying property in a foreign country versus just renting from somebody, oftentimes the economics make sense that it's worth it to do it because you're saving hundreds of dollars. Your biggest expense every month is going to be real estate, your mortgage or your rent. And if you can save hundreds of euros a month, which equate to thousands over the course of the year, tens of thousands over time, it's something to consider. So that's why I wanted to make this video. I've talked to people about why they choose to rent versus buy, and I wanted to give you some of the reasons for both. Not the cons or why you shouldn't, but some good reasons why you should rent or should buy, and really depending on your mindset and your thought of the property. Is it an asset? Is it somebody else's place? What your thoughts are on committing to the country and the city that you move to. Those all play a role in this. So as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and have a great day. Hey, thanks so much for watching the full video. If you get a chance, and if you're interested in reading some crazy workplace stories, please check out my two books, Magnet of Madness Volume 1 and Volume 2, both available on Amazon in ebook or softcover. If you want to make fun of me, there's plenty of stories where you can do that. If you want to make yourself feel better about the job that you're in, it'll make you feel better too. But crazy stuff that happened over 30 years, you won't believe it until you read it. So thank you so much for watching. And if you get a chance, pick up a copy of one of these on Amazon. Thank you so much.